What's going on? Let me know if you have any questions. Type them out and I'll do the best I can to answer them. What's going on? What's going on, Ms. One? What's going on, Roots? Let me know if y'all have any requested topics. Sheesh. Yeah, that's wild. Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. That's real wild. What's going on, John? Yeah. No time like the present. So let me know if y'all have any requested topics. I'm probably gonna just be covering some different things as far as like prerequisites for claiming the minor accounts, just to kind of go over those again. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, look up minor accounts 31 CFR 363.6. You'll see what I'm talking about. There are a few things that people got to do. It's not just, let me go up and get into court. You got to have some things established before then. So, you're going to want to make sure that you get, your name change done. Do that from, like, if the name on the birth certificate is John Henry Doe, make sure you're doing it from all caps John Henry Doe to, upper and lower, proper case, Doe, comma, John hyphen Henry, or Doe, comma, John, something like that. Could we go over the steps or points necessary? Yeah. So you do those. Let me see. So that name change. Yeah, the name change basically gives you control. It allows you to be able to correct the issue of personage, or the personhood, which is the mask everybody's looking to escape. But it is your business, so you still have to manage it. So after that, or in parallel, make sure you have your assumed name certificates done. The real man is surname given, surname comma given. The person is first, middle, last. So that's another key. Making sure that you... What else? Correcting some of those presumptions with Sesta KV. Doing different documents of that in the county. So... There are some forms that may need to be done, but they're very specific and you have to know how to do them. But they're not, it just depends. You are technically an officer of an independent treasury. So that's the reason why they construe you to be employees. But, you have to change the presumption that you're the trustee instead of the executor. So you are the executor. That gives you the authority to fill out certain forms without certain liabilities. If you're really just worried about it and you don't want to use that title, just use authorized representative. Because you are the authorized representative of that decedent or that fictional person, that two-dimensional ens legis. So, you do that. What else is there? Those are some prerequisites. The foreign express trusts. I prefer Carlton Weiss's model with the private express trust under the common law, functioning under the general law merchant, combined with the proper claim of tax treaties, set up, outside the United States, if you catch my drift. And what else? Correcting bad contracts, getting rid of marriage licenses, getting rid of other things. Eventually getting rid of the driver's license, getting passports, stuff like that. We're not the insurance adjusters. The adjusters are the trustees that disperse payments after a claim is made. So we're not really SSA reps, because SSA are custodial accounts, meaning they're withholding from the estate. Oh no, I'm just going over prerequisites, roots, just prerequisites for claiming the minor accounts. So, something for anything that you put your signature to, If there was not full disclosure, then, you know, you have the right to rescind that, you know, contract if there was misrepresentation, fraud, duress, or coercion, but you have to notify all the parties to the contract. Well, at first, before you get a card on your own, you're just implied surety. But you have to change the presumptions. There's a different, you know, the normal application that the SSA has you fill out is for Social Security numbers inside the United States. There's one for number holders outside the United States, if you weren't aware. So, yeah, you got it right, Atlantis. Look up minor. Just look up those two definitions, minor and minor account. You'll see what I'm talking about. I don't want to put everything out there right now, but you can look that up. So yeah. You know, we're above the age of majority. Everybody's supposed to be managing their affairs. So that's what, you know, that's what I'm doing my best to help to train people and get them up to speed as far as how to manage their own businesses. So that's what you're realistically doing. So you have to treat this like a business. You maintain diligent records, you keep your own ledgers, you maintain accountings of all the stuff you have. And that's, you know, even for large businesses, they have ledgers. So ledger book is the accounting of all the different transactions and different correspondence and all the things that has gone on through the business. So, you know, you treat it like a business and you'll get the fruits of it. So maintain diligent records so that way you can, you know, refer to things in the future if for any reason anything arises. There's no guarantee, but it's better safe than sorry. So yeah, and that's something there. You know, other custodial arrangements with the state over children, that has to be sorted out. If you know, make sure you handle to get rid of all those bad contracts. Like I said, you know, you have the right to rescind contracts where there was no full disclosure, there was duress, coercion, or misrepresentation. But like I said, for notice of rescission and estoppels, you have to give notice to all the parties to the contract. So that is something to bear in mind, and that is something that you have to, you know, and if it's done for legal purposes, you got to send it bare minimum certified return receipt. So yeah, there are forms for withdrawal of that though. Just depends. You got to look into your what forms are done in their books. So, but there are forms for it, and that is one of those things where you need the form, but you also need a notice of rescission and an affidavit or something along those lines, a testimony, first-hand testimony. So yeah, getting rid of bad contracts, changing the way that your estate is held. So you can acquire, your trust can acquire your estate if it's foreign. So you can, you know, fill out 1099A to acquire your estate, acquire other business properties and other things to your trust. It's something that you can do. So yeah, you know, that's something you'll want to be aware of there. What else? There's a few things. So yeah, there's a few different things that you can do, you know, as far as getting that going. And let me see what else is there. So you'll want to build up prima facie evidence, update the social security accounts, update the FTC, update certain things. Want to settle some debts if you have them. It just helps before you go to settle the main accounts and stuff like that. But yeah, those are some of the things that you should be looking into. So, hold harmless and indemnity agreements. So, let me see. Commercial security agreements, powers of attorney, revocations of power of attorney. Copyright, poor man's copyright, common law copyright. What else? Certain types of liens. Some I can go over right now, some of them that I can't. Non-UCC liens. Liens that do not fall under the UCC articles. They do all have insurance. All insurance is based on maritime bonding and maritime contracts. So there are supposed to be ways to claim certain policies, but it's a little hard to when you're considered the surety. So you have to correct your status on that, on the contract, and change the way things are held. A lot of those are held, you are recovered after the main account is, reclaimed. It is, because, you start going after too many small projects, you end up just not getting to as far as you like, and you just get on all these little tangents, and then you're just sitting there kind of like, well, why did I do that? So I'm not saying there's not some remedies in certain things, but for the amount of time you have to spend when doing certain things, it just depends. So yeah, let me see. What other things there are? There are a few things that you can do though. Changing the way that your property is held, if you've got real property, conveying that to trust. But yeah, stuff like that. But that's the type of stuff you need to be taking a look at, because those are different things that mount up to build a case. So, doing that and making sure that it's done correctly that's how you change the situs of the trust. And then when you change the situs of the trust, you're able to change your standing. So those are some things there to work on. Let's see what else. The situs. The situs of the trust is the location of the assets. It's also considered the corpus or the res of the trust. When you change the domicile or the principal office location or the permanent residence of the trust. The trust is considered a resident of wherever the main majority of assets are held. And there can also be stipulations in the trust itself that dictate, regardless of where the situs of the assets are, the trust resides in a particular place. But you'll have to be careful to maintain diligence records with that. Let me see. What else? So I got a few things. Treatise on the suits and chancery. Ooh. Wait. No. Where is that? I mean, as long as the trust is set up properly, it really shouldn't affect the trust that much. The whole point is this, because the type of trust that I'm talking about, a living trust don't really matter. Everything's just kind of already, as soon as you set it up and you put it in there, you can take things in and out. It's inter vivos with a revocable living trust. Now, whether it's foreign or domestic, that'll determine a lot. But, an irrevocable express trust, where the assets are held in its own separate entity, where the testator or the grantor, the dissettler, does not maintain control over the property itself, that's going to change a lot. So, under the social, is not considered the owner or the, the controller of the property. So that's what I would say on that. You do want to make sure that it's treated differently, as far as the situs, and it owns its own stuff. So the trust is responsible for this, the trust is responsible for that. That's why it helps. Like, the whole point is, it's hard to settle the whole straw man or the person itself if you don't have something to hold the funds and property in. So it just all dissolves. There's nothing left. So you have to have some vessel to hold the funds, or the current sea of water, in a particular vessel. So this is why you need some type of entity, LLC, trust, the trust that owns it, etc., that you're able to put the funds in. So that's what I would say on that. Let me see. Where is subrogation? Where is it? Courts and special, dispossession, disturbance. Let me see. Ooh, this is a good one. So, this is Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. This is on incorporeal hereditaments. And if you're not aware, the surname is an incorporeal hereditament, which is important because of the Sesta Act. An incorporeal hereditament is a right issuing out of a thing corporate, whether real or personal, or concerning, or annexed to, or exercisable within the same. It is not the thing corporate itself, which may consist in lands, houses, jewels, or the like, but something collateral thereto, as a rent issuing out of those lands, or houses, or an office relating to those jewels. In short, as the logicians speak, corporeal hereditaments are the substance which may always be seen, always handled. Incorporeal hereditaments are but a sort of accidents, which inhere in and are supported by that substance, and may belong or not belong to it, without any visible alteration therein. Their existence is merely an idea, an abstracted contemplation, though their effects and profits may be frequently objects of our bodily senses. And indeed, we would fix a clear notion of and the thing, or hereditament, which produces them. An annuity, for instance, is an incorporeal hereditament. For though the money, which is the fruit or product of this annuity, is doubtless of a corporeal nature, yet the annuity itself, which produces that money, is a thing invisible, has only a mental existence, and cannot be delivered over from hand to hand. So tithes, if we consider the produce of them, as the 10th sheaf or 10th lamb, seem to be completely corporeal, yet they are indeed incorporeal hereditaments, for they are, being merely a contingent right, collateral to and issuing out of lands, can never be the object of the sense. They are neither capable of being shown to the eye, nor being delivered into bodily possession. Incorporeal hereditaments are principally of 10 forts: advowsons, tithes, commons, ways, offices, dignities, franchises, corrodies, pensions, annuities, and rents. Advowson is the right of presentation to a church or ecclesiastical benefice. Advowson, advocatio, signifies in clientelum recipere the taking into protection, and therefore is synonymous with patronage, patronatus, and he who has the right of advowson is called the patron of the church. For when the lords of manor first built churches on their own demesnes, and appointed the the tithes of those manors to be paid to the officiating ministers, which were given to the clergy in common, from whence, as was formerly mentioned, arose the division of parishes. The Lord, who thus built a church and endowed it with a glebe or land, had the common right of power annexed or nominating such minister as he pleased, provided he were canonically qualified, to officiate in that church, of which he was the founder, endower, maintainer, or in one word, the patron. This instance of advowson will completely illustrate the nature of an incorporeal hereditament. It is not itself the bodily possession of the church and its appendages. What's going on, Amanita? But it is a right to give some other man a title to such bodily possession. The advowson is an object of neither the fight nor the touch. Neither the sight nor the touch. And yet it perpetually exists in the mind's eye and in contemplation of law. It cannot be delivered from man to man by any visible bodily transfer, nor can any corporeal possession be had of it. If the patron takes a corporeal possession of the church, the churchyard, the glebe, or the like, he intrudes on another man's property, for to these the parson has an exclusive right. The patronage can therefore be only conveyed by operation of law, by verbal grant, either oral or written, which is a kind of invisible mental transfer. And being so vested, it lies dormant and unnoticed, till occasion calls it forth, and when it produces a visible corporeal fruit, by entitling some clerk, whom the patron shall please to nominate, to enter and receive bodily possession of the lands and tenements of the church. Advowsons are either advowsons appendant or advowsons in gross. Lords of manors, being originally the only founders, and of course the only patrons of churches, the right of patronage or presentation, so long as it continues annexed to the possession of the manor, as some have done from the foundation of the church to this day, is called an advowson appendant, and it will pass or be conveyed, together with the manor, as incident and appendant thereto, by a grant of the manor only, without adding any other words. But where the property of the advowson has once been separated from the property of the manor by legal conveyance, it is called an advowson in gross, or at large, and never can be appendant anymore. But it is for the future annexed to the person of its owner, and not his manor of lands. Advowsons are also either presentative, collative, or donative. An advowson presentative is where the patron hath a right of presentation to the bishop or ordinary, and moreover to demand of him to institute his clerk, if he find him canonically qualified, is where the bishop and patron are one and the same person, in which case the bishop cannot present us the whole that is done in common cases, by both presentation and institution. An advowson donative is when the king or any subject by his license doth found a church or chapel, and ordains that it shall be merely in the gift or disposal of the patron, subject to his visitation only, and not to that of the ordinary, and vested absolutely in the clerk of the patron's deed of donation, without presentation, institution, or induction. This is said to have been anciently the only way of conferring ecclesiastical benefices in England, the method of institution by the bishop not being established more early than the time of the Archbishop Becket in the reign of Henry II. What's going on, Silent Walk? And therefore, though Pope Alexander III, in a letter to Becket, severely inveighs against prava consuetudo, as he calls it, of investiture conferred, others contend that the claim of the bishops to institution is as old as the first planting of Christianity in this island, and in proof of it they allege a letter from the English nobility to the Pope in the reign of Henry III, according to Matthew Paris, which speaks of presentation to the bishop as a thing immemorial. That where the benefice has to be conferred on a mere layman, he was first presented to the bishop, in order to receive ordination, who was at liberty to examine and refuse him. But where the clerk is already in orders, the living was usually vested in him by the sole donation of the patron, till about the middle of the 12th century, when the Pope and his bishops endeavored to introduce a kind of feudal dominion over the ecclesiastical benefices, and in consequence of that, began to claim and exercise the right of institution universally, as a species of spiritual investiture. However this may be, as the law now stands, the true patron once waives this privilege of donation and presents it to the bishop, and his clerk is admitted and instituted the advowson. The advowson is now become forever presentative and shall never be donative anymore. For these exceptions to general rules and common right are ever looked upon by the law in an unfavorable view, and construed as strictly peculiar right resides, does once give up that right. The law, which loves uniformity, will interpret it to be done with an intention of giving it up forever, and will thereupon reduce it to the standard of other ecclesiastical livings. A second species of incorporeal hereditament is that of tithes, which are defined to be the 10th part of the increase yearly arising and renewing from the profits of lands, the stock upon lands, and the personal industry of the inhabitants. The first species being usually called Prejudice, as of corn, grass, hops, and wood. The second mixed as of wool, milk, pigs, etc., consisting of natural products, but nurtured and preserved in part and gross. The third personal, as of manual occupations, trades, fisheries, and the like. And these only the 10th part of the clear gains and profits is due. It is not expected from the nature of these general commentaries that I should particularly specify what things are tithable and what not, the time when, or the manner and proportion in which tithes are usually due. For this I must refer to such authors as have treated the matter in detail, and shall only observe that in general, tithes are to be paid for everything that yields an annual increase, as corn, hay, fruit, cattle, poultry, and the like, but not for anything that is of the substance of the earth, or is not of annual increase, as stone, lime, chalk, and the like, nor for creatures that are of wild nature, or fera nature, as deer, hawks, etc., whose increase so as to the profit of the owner is not annual but casual. It will rather be our business to consider the original of the right of tithes, in whom that right at present subsists, who may be discharged either totally or in part from paying them. As to their original, I will not put the title of clergy to the tithes upon my divine right, or upon any divine right, though such a right certainly commenced, and I believe as certainly ceased with the Jewish theocracy. Wow. Yet an honorable and competent maintenance for the ministers of the gospel is. Let's see. Let me see. Now, whether he's talking about Jewish or actual Jews remains to be seen. But tithes is mentioned in the Torah and the Tanakh, so that's their origin and their source. So the Catholic Church trying to maintain tithes is usurpation. Nevertheless, let's see what other incorporeal hereditaments it talks about. See. Estovers is a liberty of taking necessary wood for the use of furniture of a house or farm from another's estate. The Saxon word boat is of the same signification as French estovers, and therefore houseboat is a sufficient allowance of wood to repair or to burn in the house, which later is sometimes called fireboat. Plowboat and cartboat are wood to be employed in the making and repairing all instruments of husbandry, and hayboat or hedgeboat in wood, repairing of hedges or fences. These boats or estovers must be reasonable ones, and such any tenant or lessee may take off the land, let or demise to him without waiting for any leave, assignment, or appointment to the lessor, unless he be restrained by special covenant to the contrary. These several species of commons do all originally result from the same necessity as a common pasture. Dignities. Let me see. Oh, offices. Offices are an incorporeal hereditament. Offices which are a right to exercise a public or private employment, and the fees and emoluments thereunto belonging, are also incorporeal hereditaments, whether public, as those of magistrates, or private, as of bailiffs, receivers, and the like. Interesting to note that the bailiff is a private office. For a man may have an estate in them, either to him and his heirs, or for life, or for a term of years, or during pleasure only, save only that offices of public trust cannot be granted for a term of years, especially if they concern the administration of justice, for then they might perhaps vest in executors or administrators. Neither can be any judicial office be granted in reversion, because though the grantee may be able to perform at the time of the grant, yet before the office falls, he may become unable and insufficient. But ministerial offices may be so granted, for those may also be executed by deputy, also by statute of 5th and Statute 5 and 6 by Edward VI. No public office shall be sold under a pain of disability to dispose of or hold it. For the law presumes that he who buys an office will be by bribery, extortion, or other unlawful means make his purchase good, to the manifest detriment of the public. Very interesting to note. Dignities, or honors technically, bear a near relation to offices. Of the nature of these we treated at large in the former book. It will therefore be here sufficient to mention them as a species of incorporeal hereditaments, wherein a man may have property or estate. Franchise and liberty are used as synonymous terms, and their definition is a royal privilege, or branch of the king's prerogative, subsisting in the hands of a subject. Being therefore derived from a crown, they must arise from the king's grant, or in some cases, may be held by prescription. Very interesting. Which has been, as has been frequently said, presupposes a grant. The kinds of them are various and almost infinite. I will here briefly touch upon some of the principal, premising only that they may be vested in either natural persons or bodies politic, in one man or in many. But the same identical franchise that has before been granted to one cannot be bestowed on another, for that would prejudice the former grant. To a country palatine is a franchise vested in a number of persons. It is likewise a franchise for a number of persons to be incorporated and subsist as a body politic, with a power to maintain perpetual succession, to do other corporate acts, and each individual member of such corporation is also said to have a franchise or freedom. Other franchises are to hold a court leet. Hold a court leet. I've never heard that one. I might have to look that one up later. To have if anyone wants to look that one up for me, I'd be thankful for that, because I don't know what that is. To have a manor or lordship, or at least to have a lordship paramount. To have wastes, so features and diadems. To have a court of one's own. Interesting. Or liberty of holding pleas and trying causes. To have a cognizance of pleas, which is still greater liberty, being an exclusive right, so that no other court shall try causes arising within that jurisdiction. To have a bailiwick, or liberty exempt from the sheriff of the county, wherein the grantee only and his officers are to execute all processes. To have a fair or market, with the right of taking a toll, either there or at any other public places, as at bridges, wharfs, and the like, which tolls must have a reasonable clues of commencement, as in consideration of repairs or the like, else the franchise is illegal and void. Or loyalty, which species of franchise may require a more minute discussion. That sounds a lot like a park. I'm not going to go into that, but as to a forest, this is in the hands of a subject. Is properly the same thing as a chase, being subject to the common law and not to the forest laws. But a chase differs from a park in that it is not enclosed, and also in that a man may have a chase in another man's ground as well as his own, being indeed the liberty of keeping beasts of chase for royal game therein, protected even from the owner of the land, with the power of hunting them thereon. That's like a lease for hunting. Oh, okay. A park is an enclosed chase extending only over a man's own grounds. Need I say more? The word park indeed properly signifies any enclosure, but yet it is not every field or common which a gentleman pleases to surround with a wall or paling, and to stock with a herd of deer, that is thereby constituted a legal park. For the king's grant, or at least immemorial prescription, is necessary to make it so. Though now, the difference between a real park and such enclosed grounds is in many respects not very material, only that it is unlawful at common law for any person to kill any beasts of a park or chase, except such as possess these franchises of forest, chase, or park. Free warren is a similar franchise erected for preservation or custody, which the word signifies, of beasts and fowls of warren. That sounds like warden, but I'm not going to go into that either. Which, being fera naturae, everyone had a natural right to kill as he could. But upon the introduction of forest laws at the Norman conquest, must say one thing and one thing only: migratory game birds. As will be shown hereafter, these animals being looked upon as royal game and sole property of our savage monarchs. Oh, wow. That's quite the statement. This franchise of free warren was invented to protect them, by giving the grantee a sole and exclusive power of killing such game, so far as his warrant extended, on condition of his preventing other persons than a royal gamekeeper. But no man, not even a lord of manor, could by common law justify sporting on another's soil, or even on his own, unless he had the liberty of free warren. This franchise has almost fallen into disregard, since new statutes for preserving the game, the name being now chiefly preserved in grounds that are set apart from breeding hares and rabbits. I'd say there's still a franchise left. That's just me. There are many instances of keen sportsmen in ancient times who have sold their estates and reserved the free warren over another's ground. A free fishery? Oh, fishery. A free fishery or exclusive rights of fishing in a public river is also for exclusive right of fishing in a public river is also a royal franchise. I hope everyone caught that one. And is considered as such in all countries where the feudal polity has prevailed. I hope everybody understands that part too. Though the making such grants, and by that means appropriating what seems to be unnatural to restrain the use of running water, was prohibited for the future by King John's Great Charter, and the rivers that were fenced in his time were directed to be laid open, as well as the forests to be disafforested? Disafforested. Yeah. This opening was extended by the second and third charters of Henry III to those also, so that a franchise of free fishery ought now to be at least as old as the reign of Henry II. This differs from several fishery because he that has a several fishery must also be the owner of the soil. It differs also from a common piscary before mentioned, in that the free fishery is an exclusive right. Common of piscary is not so, and therefore in a free fishery a man has a property in the fish before they are caught. This is Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. Book number 2, chapter 3 of Incorporeal Hereditaments. The original stuff that they don't talk about for a reason. Okay, let me see. Free fishery is an exclusive right. The common piscary is not so, and therefore in a free fishery a man has a property in the fish before they are caught. In a common piscary, not until afterwards, as a private grant of liberty to the fish in the several fishery of the grantor. But the considering such right as originally a flower of the prerogative, till restrained by the Magna Carta, and derived by royal grant previous to reign of Richard I, to such as now claim it by prescription, may remove some difficulties in respect to this matter, with which our books are embarrassed. Oh wow. Cardes, not sure how I pronounce that one, are a right of sustenance, or to receive certain allotments of victual and provision for one's maintenance. In lieu of which, especially when due from ecclesiastical persons, a pension or sum of money is sometimes substituted. And these may be reckoned another species of incorporeal hereditaments, though not chargeable on or issuing from any corporeal inheritance, but only charged on the person of the owner in respect of such his inheritance. To these may be added annuities, which are much of the same nature, only that these arise from temporal, as the former from spiritual persons. An annuity is a thing very distinct from a rent charge, with which it is frequently confounded. A rent charge being a burden imposed upon and issuing out of lands, whereas an annuity is a yearly sum chargeable only upon the person of the grantor. Therefore, if a man by deed grant to another the sum of 20, I don't know if that's pounds, not sure, per annum, without expressing out of what lands it shall issue, no land at all shall be charged with it, but it is a mere personal annuity, which is of so little account in the law that if granted to an eleemosynary corporation, it is not within the statutes of mortmain, and yet a man may have a real estate in it, though his security is merely personal. So it's not collateralized. Rents are the last species of incorporeal hereditaments. Reditus signifies a compensation or return, it being in the nature of an acknowledgement given for the possession of some corporeal inheritance. It is defined to be a certain profit issuing yearly out of lands and tenements corporeal. It must be a profit, yet there is no occasion for it to be, as it usually is, a sum of money. For spurs, capons, horses, corn, and other manties may be rendered, and frequently are rendered by way of rent. It may also consist in services or manual operations, as to plow for many acres of ground, to attend the king or the lord to the wars, and the like, which service in the eye of the law are profits. This profit must also be certain, or that which may be reduced to a certainty by a successive year, but it may be reserved every second, third, or fourth year. Yet, as it is to be produced out of the profits of lands and tenements, as a recompense for being permitted to hold and enjoy them, it ought to be reserved yearly, because those profits do annually arise and are annually renewed. It must issue out of the thing granted, and not be part of the land or thing itself, wherein it differs from an exception in the grant, which is always part of the thing granted. It must lastly issue out of lands and tenements corporeal, that is, form some inheritance whereunto the owner or grantee of the rent may have recourse to distrain. Therefore, a rent cannot be reserved out of an advowson, a common, an office, a franchise, or the like. But a grant of such annuity or sum may operate as a personal contract and oblige the grantor to pay the money reserved, or subject him to an action of debt, though it doth not affect the inheritance and is no legal rent in contemplation of law. There are at common law three manner of rents: it's rent service, rent charge, and rent sec. Rent service is so called because it hath some corporeal service incident to it. Fealty, or the feudal oath of fidelity. For if a tenant holds his land by fealty and 10 shillings rent, or by the service of plowing the Lord's land, and 5 shillings rent, these pecuniary rents, being connected with personal services, are therefore called rent service. And for these, in case they be behind or arrear at the day appointed, the Lord may distrain of common right without reserving any special power of distress, provided that they hath in himself the reversion or future estate of lands and tenements, after the lease of particular estate of the lessee or grantee is expired. Now, I'm gonna have to read that again. Okay, so rent service is so called because it hath some corporeal service incident to it, as at the least fealty or at the feudal oath of fidelity. For if a tenant holds his land by fealty and 10 shillings rent, or by the service of plowing the Lord's land. I hope everybody understands what that means. And 5 shillings rent, these pecuniary rents, being connected with personal services, are therefore called rent service. And for these, in case they be behind or arrear at the day appointed, the Lord may distrain of common right without reserving any special power of distress, provided they hath in himself the reversion or future estate of the lands and tenements after the lease or particular estate of the lessee or grantee is expired. This is why I said before, rents is fraud, renting is fraud, leasing is fraud. It's in the scripture, it's in the Torah and the Tanakh. Rent charge is where the owner of the rent hath no future interest or reversion expectant in the land, as where a man by deed maketh over to others his whole estate in fee simple, with a certain rent payable thereout, and adds to the deed a covenant or clause of distress, that if the rent be arrear or behind, it shall be lawful to distrain from the same. That sounds like eviction. In this case, the land is liable to distress not of common right, but by virtue of the clause in the deed. And therefore it is called a rent charge, because in the manner of the land is charged with a distress for the payment of it. I hope everybody is understanding what is said here, because I'm not sure how much I can say beyond that. Rent sec, reditus sicus, yeah, okay, it is sec, reditus sicus, or barren rent, is in effect nothing more than a rent reserved by deed, but without any clause of distress. There are also other species of rents, which are reducible to these three. Rents of assize are the certain established rents of the freeholders and ancient copy holders of the manor, which cannot be departed from or varied. Those of the freeholders are frequently called chief rents, reditus capitals, chief rents. That sounds a little bit like head rights. And both forts are indifferently denominated quit rents, quieti reditus, because thereby the tenant goes quit and free of all other services. When these payments were reserved in silver or white money, they were anciently called white rents or blanched farms, reditus albi, in contradistinction to rents reserved in work, grain, etc., which were in Scotland. This small kind of payment is called blench holding or reditus albus firmae, which were called reditus nigri or blackmail. Wait. What? We are subtenants or subleases to the landlords and tenants, correct? No, I mean, if they're the fee simple holders of the property, then they are considered technically the landlords, although the sovereign is considered holder of the title fee simple absolute. Distinction to the rents reserved in work, grain, etc., which were called reditus nigri or blackmail. Hold up. Those of the freeholders were capital rents for both forts or indifferent. Okay, because they're about when these payments were reserved in silver or white money, they were anciently called white rents or blanched farms, reditus albi, in contradistinction to rents reserved in work, grain, etc., which were called reditus nigri or blackmail. Oh my, this is amazing. I hope everybody's understanding this. Rec rent, a fee farm rent, is a rent charge issuing out of an estate in fee for a grant of lands reserving so considerable a rent. It is the issue indeed only letting lands to farm in fee simple instead of the usual methods for life or years. These are the general divisions of rents. But the difference between them, in respect to the remedy for recovering them, is now totally abolished, and all persons may have the like remedy by distress for rents sec, rents of assize, and chief rents, as in cases of rents reserved upon lease. Rent is regularly due and payable upon the land from whence it issues, if no particular place is mentioned in the reservation, but in the case of the king. The payment must be either to his officers or at the exchequer or to his receiver in the country. Oh my word. And strictly the rent is demandable and payable before the time of sunset of the day whereon it is reserved, though some have thought it not absolutely due till midnight. With regard to the original rents, something will be said in the next chapter, and as to distress and other remedies for their recovery, the doctrine relating thereto, and the several proceedings thereon, these belong properly to the third part of the Commentaries, which will treat of civil injuries and the means whereby they are redressed. I hope everybody was paying attention, because that said a lot. I'm not sure if I can say that any more layman than it was spoken of, but that was a lot. I didn't think it was going to be like that, but it was a lot. So if you haven't read William Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, I highly suggest you go read them, dig around in them a bit, figure out what you can read and other things. But that right there is very, very particular, and it's very key to note that the surname is an incorporeal hereditament. I'm wonder if it's because of the other incorporeal hereditaments tied there too. But it's just a thought. So, any questions on that? Any comments? Any thoughts on that one? Before I continue. That was one that's... I'm going to pick it up in another chapter of Blackstone's in a little bit, but just wanted to see what y'all thought. There's a lot to be learned. I'm learning stuff every single day. Don't think for a minute that just because I'm sitting here talking, I'm not learning. This is as much as a scavenger hunt for me as it is for other people. Just because I have a few more clues doesn't mean that I'm by any means know-it-all. Pretty much, you got it, John. The Christian name is it's a personification or a person. It's not the true name, which is everybody's problem. The true name is not a person. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a true name. It wouldn't create a fiction of law, because a fiction of law is something fictitious. So a person can't be that. So it has to be something else. But, which is the reversion. The reversion of the name. That's what kept all the assets held in escrow and kept it away from the original owner. Yeah. So it gets wild. Just so y'all know, if y'all... So in claiming those reversionary interests, you know, like I said, you know, like Minnesota Rule 220 or other things like that, you know, we do talk about those type of things in the Private Equity Weekly Workshop. There are some remedies that are pretty much exclusively private, as they can't really be discussed in the public, because they wouldn't be private remedies if they were all in the public. But there are things that you can talk about in the public and things you can't. But what's going on, David? If you need assistance with setting up a private trust, you know, foreign express trust and all that, along with the revocable living trust, let me know. If you need like a one-on-one, like a consultation for, I don't know, an ongoing issue, a matter, case, something like that, you know, let me know. I'll have my information in the description later, once I go back and add it in. But yeah, that's what it was, John. They demanded the rents and charges upon the surname, which is why they demanded the debts to be paid out of the original letters patent. But why give them the letters patent, which would be the freehold to the title of the property? I don't understand. So don't give them the freehold, you give them the interest. So, yeah. But America is the old world. It was never overseas in the supposed British Isles or so-called Europe. Europe was here in America prior to the Reconstruction. So, yeah, you want to make sure that you study the old British laws, because everybody thinks they know American law, but American law holds no weight. That's a trust that's now defunct. In essence, dissolved. Everybody's living in a corporate environment because everybody's in the corporation. So you have to study old common law, old British law. So that's something that you have to understand. It's also the foundation of all of the principles of the things that people don't understand today. If you understand feudal law and trusts and fiatments and conveyances to use, you'll do quite well. So, different redress by operation of law, which there is actually a remedy, but it's not under what the normal stuff that people understand. That's a good point, John. I don't know. I didn't catch that one, but it is American and British, because it's on the continent of North America. Well, all of the Americas, plural. But Britannia was an old empire prior to the Reconstruction. They scrubbed the histories of it. If you look it up, it's still in movies and TV. That was all here in the Americas. It was a history channel. I think it was History Unveiled or something like that. Or America History Unveiled, something. It was one of those History Channel shows that talked about Europeans in America in the 1500s. And evidence to substantiate that as well. Yeah. So, yeah, it was all here. It was not until the Reconstruction era that it is in the supposed Isles Britannica, or the British Isles, now being called Europe. Europe was here. It always was. That's why you have the concept of mirror cities with the same name, for the purposes of sequestering administration. Alright, well, I'm gonna continue. Let's see what we got. Yeah, this will be good. Feudal system. Yes, they were always here legally. It was the people that started the United States of America that were setting up a fraudulent thing. It was here to take away the land from the Cherokee Indians. Look up the Cherokee Indian War, 1776. Alright, so this is Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, Book the 2nd, Chapter 4, Feudal System. So, it is impossible to understand with any degree of accuracy either the civil constitution of this kingdom or the laws which regulate its landed property without some general acquaintance with the nature and doctrine of feuds or the feudal law. a system so universally received throughout Europe upwards of 12 centuries ago that Sir Henry Spelman does not scruple to call it the law of nations in our Western world. That was a very big key. I hope everyone caught that. This chapter will be therefore dedicated to this inquiry. And though, in the course of our observations, in this and many other parts of the present book, we may have occasion to search pretty highly into the antiquities of our English jurisprudence, yet surely no industrious student will imagine his time misemployed when he is led to consider that the obsolete doctrines of our laws are frequently the foundation upon which that remains is erected, and that it is impracticable to comprehend many rules of modern law in a scholar's researches be altogether void of rational entertainment as well as use, as in viewing the majestic ruins of Roman Athens, of Baalbek, or Palmyra. It administers both pleasure and instruction to compare them with the draughts of the same edifices, in their pristine proportion and splendor. The constitution of feuds had its original from the military policy of the northern or Celtic nations, the Goths, the Huns, the Franks, the Vandals, and the Lombards, who, all migrating from the same Officina Gentium, as Cragg very justly entitles it, poured themselves in vast quantities into all the regions of Europe, at the declension of the Roman Empire. Well, that might have been the diaspora in the mid-1800s. That actually might have in their respective colonies as the most likely means to secure their new acquisitions. And to that end, large districts or parcels of land were allotted by the conquering general to the superior officers of the army, and by them dealt out again in smaller parcels or allotments to the inferior officers and most deserving soldiers. These allotments in the northern languages signifies a conditional stipend or reward. Rewards or stipends they evidently were, and the condition annexed to them was that the possessor should do service faithfully, both at home and in wars, to him by whom they were given, for which purpose he took juramentum fidelitatis, or oath of fealty, and in the case of breach of this condition and oath, by not performance hid them. Allotments thus acquired naturally engaged such as accepted them to defend them, and as they all sprang from the same right of conquest, no part could subsist independent of the whole, wherefore all givers as well as receivers were mutually bound to defend each other's possessions. But as that could not effectually be done in a tumultuous, irregular way, government, and that to that purpose subordination was necessary. Every receiver of lands, or feudatory, was therefore bound, when called upon by his benefactor, or immediate lord of his feud or fee simple, or fee tail, to do all in his power to defend him. Such benefactor or lord was likewise subordinate to and under the command of his immediate benefactor or superior, and so upwards to the prince or general himself. And the several lords were also reciprocally bound, in their respective gradations, to protect the possessions they had given. Thus, the feudal connection was established, a proper military subjection was naturally introduced, and an army of feudatories was always ready and lifted and mutually prepared to muster, not only in defense of each man's own several property, but also in defense of the whole, and of every part of this their newly acquired country, the prudence of which constitution was soon sufficiently visible in the strength and spirit with which they maintained their conquests. I hope everybody understood what was just said. The universality and early use of this feudal plan among all those nations which in complaisance to the Romans we still call barbarous, may appear from what is recorded of the Cimbri and Teutones, nations of the same northern original as those whom we have been describing, at their first eruption into Italy about a century before the Christian era. They demanded of the Romans, ut martus populus aliquid Phoebe terrae daret quasi stipend. Dium caeterum ut velit minibus atque armis suis uteritur. That I'm gonna have to look up. That was too much. I gotta look that up. Yeah, I gotta find out what that means. That was too much. That was a whole statement. Come on, load. Come on. Okay. Ut Martius Populus. Ut Martius Populus. Does it give a description? Come on. They didn't give a... What? Translation there. Let's see if this one does. That was interesting. What does that mean? Alright, well, I don't know. Let's try Google Translate. That the people might give something to the son of the land as a stipend, but as they wished, they might use their own weapons. Okay, it's talking about you can either serve the country, or you have to give something of the land. Serve the feudal lord, rather. Okay, so that's what it means. Desired stipendiary lands, that is feuds, to be allowed them to be held by military and other personal services whenever their lords should call upon them. This was evidently the same constitution that displayed itself more fully about 700 years afterwards, when the Salii, Burgundians, and Franks broken upon Gaul, the Visigoths on Spain, and the Lombards upon Italy, and introduced with themselves this northern plan of polity, serving at once to protect the territories they had newly gained. And from hence it is probable that the Emperor Alexander Severus took the hint of dividing lands conquered from the enemy among his generals and victorious foldry, on condition of receiving military service from them and their heirs forever. Okay. Yeah. Alright. Scarce had these northern conquerors established themselves in their new dominions, when the wisdom of their constitutions, as well as their personal valor. Okay, good. Their personal valor alarmed all the princes of Europe. That is, of those countries which had formerly been Roman provinces, but had revolted, or were deserted by their old masters, in the general wreck of the empire. Wherefore, most, if not all, of them thought it necessary to enter into the same or similar plan of policy. For whereas, before the possessions of their subjects were perfectly allodial, that is, territories, or persuaded their subjects to surrender up and retake their own landed property, under the like feudal obligation of military fealty. Interesting to note. And thus, in the compass of a few years, the feudal constitution, or the doctrine of tenure, extended itself over the Western world, which alteration of landed property, in so very material a point, necessarily drew after it an alteration of laws and customs, so that the feudal laws soon drove out the Roman, which had hitherto universally obtained, but now became for many centuries lost and forgotten, and Italy itself, as some of the civilians, with more spleen than judgment, have expressed it, belluinas atque serenas immanesque Longobardorum leges excepit. Alrighty, got another one. He adopted the bestial, ferocious, and savage laws of the Lombards. Ho, now I know why he put that in the original tongue. Oh, wow. All the continent of Europe seems not to have been received in this part of our island, at least not universally and as part of the national constitution, till the reign of William the Norman. But that it is reasonable to believe, from the abundant traces in our history and laws, that even in the time of the Saxons, were a swarm from what Sir William Temple calls the same northern hive. Something similar to this was in use, yet not so extensively, nor attended with all the rigor that was afterwards imported by the Normans. For the Saxons were firmly settled in this island, at least as early as the year 600, and it was not till 2 centuries after that the feuds arrived to their full vigor and maturity, even on the continent of Europe. This introduction, however, of the feudal tenures into England by King William does not seem to have been effected immediately after the conquest, nor by the mere arbitrary will and power of the conqueror, but to have been consented to by the great council of the nation long after his title was established. Indeed, from the prodigious slaughter of the English nobility at the Battle of Hastings, and the fruitless insurrections of those who survived, such numerous forfeitures had accrued, that he was able to reward his Norman followers with very large and extensive possessions, which gave a handle to the monkish historians, and such as have implicitly followed them, to represent him as having by right of the sword seized on all the lands of England, and dealt them out again to his own favorites, a supposition grounded upon a mistaken sense of the word conquest, which in its feudal acceptation signifies no more than an acquisition. And this was led many hasty writers into a strange historical mistake, and the one which upon the slightest examination will be found to be most untrue. However, certain it is that the Normans now began to gain very large possessions in England, under which they had long lived, together with the king's recommendation of this policy to the English, as the best way to put themselves on a military footing, and thereby prevent any future attempts from the continent, were probably the reasons that prevailed to effect its establishment here. And perhaps we may be able to ascertain the time of this great revolution in our landed property with a tolerable degree of exactness. For we learn from the Saxon Chronicle that in the 19th year of King William's reign an invasion was apprehended from Denmark, and the military constitution of the Saxons being then laid aside, and no other introduced in its stead, the kingdom was wholly defenseless, which occasioned the king to bring over a large army of Normans and Bretons, who were quartered upon every landholder and greatly oppressed the people. This apparent weakness, together with the grievances occasioned by a foreign force, might cooperation with the king's remonstrances, and the better incline the nobility to listen to his proposals for putting them in a posture of defense. For as soon as the danger was over, the king held a great council to inquire into the state of the nation, the immediate consequence of which was finished in the next year, and in the latter end of that very year the king was attended by all his nobility at Sarum, where all the principal landholders submitted their lands to the yoke of military tenure, became the king's vassals. I hope everyone understands what that means. And did homage and fealty to his person. This seems to have been the era of formally introducing the feudal tenures by law, and probably the very law thus made at the Council of Sarum is that which is still extant and couched in these remarkable words: Statutimus ut omnes liberi homines foedere et sacramento affirment versum regnum Angliae Wilhelmo regi domino suo fidelid esse volunt terras et honores illuius omni fidelitate ubique fervare cum eo et. Oh my, okay, alright, that's enough. I'm just gonna let's get this over with. But still, as we decree that all free men affirm by covenant and oath that they will be faithful to King William their Lord, within and without the whole kingdom of England, to guard his lands and honors with all fidelity everywhere with him, and to defend them against enemies and foreigners. Oh, okay. Alright. The terms of this law, as Sir Martin Wright has observed, are plainly feudal. For first, it requires the oath of fealty, which made in the sense of the feudists every man that took it as a tenant or vassal, and secondly, the tenants obliged themselves to defend their lord's territories and title. Not gonna say. But what puts the matter out of dispute is another law of the same collection, which exacts the performance of the military feudal services as ordained by the General Council. Omnes comites et barones et milites et first. Oh, sheesh. Oh, okay. Alright, let's do it again. If it's small. Yeah, that's a long statement. says, all earls, barons, and knights and men of valor, and all free men of our whole aforesaid kingdom, shall have and keep themselves always well armed and on horses, as is fitting and proper. Fitting and proper, and they shall always be ready. They shall be always ready and well prepared to perform and carry out their duty to us wholeheartedly when the need arises, to make fruitful what they owe us by right from their fees and tenements, as we have decreed for them by the common council of our whole aforesaid kingdom. This new polity, therefore, seems not to have been posed by the conqueror, but nationally and freely adopted by the General Assembly of the whole realm. Nations of Europe had before adopted it, upon the same principle of self-security. And in particular, they had the recent example of the French nation before their eyes, which had gradually surrendered up all its allodial or Sri lands into the king's hands, who restored them to the owners as the beneficium or feud, to be held to them in such of their heirs as they previously nominated to the king. And thus by degrees all of the allodial estates of France were converted into feuds, and the free men became the vassals of the crown. The only difference between this change of tenures in France and that in England was that the former was effected gradually by consent of private persons. The latter was done at once, all over England, by the common consent of the nation. In consequence of this change, it became a fundamental maxim and necessary principle, though in reality a mere fiction, of our English tenures, quote, that the king is the universal lord and original proprietor of all the lands in his kingdom, and that no man doth or can possess any part of it, but what has immediately or immediately been derived as a gift from him, to be held upon feudal services. For this is being the real case in pure original proper feuds in other nations, who adopted this system were obliged to act upon the same supposition as a substruction and foundation of their new polity, though the fact was indeed far otherwise. And indeed, by thus consenting to the introduction of feudal tenures, our English ancestors probably meant no more than to put the kingdom in a state of defense by establishing a military system, and to oblige themselves in respect of their lands to maintain the king's titles and territories with equal vigor and fealty, as if they had received their lands from his bounty upon these express conditions, as pure, proper, beneficiary feudatories. But whatever their meaning was, the Norman interpreters, skilled in all the niceties of feudal constitutions, and well understanding the important extent of the feudal terms, gave a very different construction to this proceeding, and thereupon took a handle to introduce not only the rigorous doctrines which prevailed in the Duchy of Normandy, but also such fruits and dependencies, such hardships and services, as was never known to other nations, as if the English had in fact, as well as theory, owed everything they had to the bounty of their sovereign lord. Our ancestors were, therefore, who were by no means beneficiaries, but had barely consented to this fiction of tenure from the crown, as the basis of a military discipline, with reason looked upon arbitrary conclusions from principles. Son William Rufus found it expedient, when he set up his pretensions to the crown, to promise a restitution of the laws of King Edward the Confessor, or ancient Saxon system, and accordingly, in the first they gave up the greater grievances, but still reserved the fiction of feudal tenure, for the same military purposes which engaged his father to introduce it. But this charter was gradually broke through, and former grievances were revived and aggravated by himself and succeeding prince, till the reign of King John they became so intolerable that they occasioned his barons and principal feudatories to rise up in arms against him, which at length produced the famous Great Chart, a running mead, which, with some alterations, was confirmed by his son Henry III. And though its amenities, especially as altered on its last edition by his son, are very greatly short of those granted by Henry I. It was justly esteemed at the time a vast acquisition to English liberty. Indeed, by the further alteration of tenures that has since happened, many of these immunities may now appear to a common observer of much less consequence than they really were when granted. But this, properly considered, will show not that the acquisitions under John were small, but that those under Charles were greater. And from hence also arises another inference, that the liberties of Englishmen are not, as some arbitrary writers would represent them, mere infringements of the king's prerogative, extorted from our princes by taking advantage of their weakness, but a restoration of the ancient constitution, of which our ancestors had been defrauded by the art and finesse of the Norman lawyers, rather than deprived by the force of the Norman arms. Having given this short of their rise and progress, we will next consider the nature, the polity, and also the original of such of our own tenures as were either abolished in the last century or still remain in force. The grand and fundamental maxim of all feudal tenure is this, that all lands were originally granted out by the sovereign, and are therefore holden either immediately or immediately of the crown. The grantor was called the proprietor, or lord, being he who retained the dominion or ultimate property of the was styled the feudatory or vassal, which was only another name for the tenant or holder of lands, though on account of the prejudices we have justly conceived against the doctrines that were afterwards grafted on this system, we now use the word vassal opprobriously as synonymous to slave or bondman. I hope everybody understood that. The manner of the grant was by words of gratuitous pure donation, dedi et concessi, which are still the operative words in our modern infeudations or deeds of enfeoffment. This was perfected by the ceremony of corporal investiture, or open and notorious delivery of possession in the presence of other vassals, which perpetuated among the era of the new acquisition, at a time when the art of writing was very little known, and therefore the evidence of property was reposed in the memory of the neighborhood, who in case of disputed title were afterwards called upon to decide the difference, not only according to external proofs adduced by the party litigant, but also by the internal testimony of their own private knowledge. Besides an oath of fealty, or possession of the faith of the Lord, which was the parent of our oath of allegiance, which did usually homage to his Lord, openly and humbly kneeling, being ungirt, uncovered, and holding up his hands both together between those of the Lord who sat before him, and there possessing that he did become honor. And then he received a kiss from his Lord, which ceremony was denominated homagium, or manhood, by the feudists, from the stated forms of words devenio fester homo. When the tenant had thus possessed himself to be the man of his superior or lord, the next consideration was concerning the service, which as such he was bound to render, in encompass or the land he held. This, in pure, proper, and original feuds, was only twofold: to follow, or to do fuit to the Lord in his courts in the time of peace, and in his armies or warlike retinue, when necessity called him to the field. The Lord was, in early times, the legislature and the judge over all of his feudatories, and therefore the vassals of the inferior lords were bound by their fealty to attend their domestic courts baron, which were instituted in every manor or barony, by doing speedy and effectual justice to all the tenants, in order as well to answer such complaints as might be alleged against themselves, as to form a jury or homage for the trial of their fellow tenants. And upon this account, in all the feudal institutions, both here and on the continent, They were distinguished by the appellation of the peers of the court, pares curtis, or pares curiae. In the manner the barons themselves, or lords of inferior districts, were denominated peers of the king's court, and were bound to attend him upon summons, to hear causes of greater consequence in the king's presence, and under the direction of his grand justiciary. Till in many countries of the power of that officer was broken and distributed into other courts of judicature, the peers of the king's court still reserving to themselves, in almost every feudal government, the right of appeal from those subordinate courts in the last resort, which is why they call it courts of last resort. The military branch of service consisted in attending the lord to the wars, is called upon with such a retinue and for such a number of days, as were stipulated at the first donation in proportion to the quantity of land. I hope everybody understands what that means and why it connects to land, tenements, and hereditaments. So also they were precarious and held at the will of the lord, who was the sole judge whether his vassal performed his services faithfully. Then they became certain, for 1 or more years. Among the ancient Germans, they continued only from year to year, an annual distribution of lands being made by their leaders in their general councils or assemblies. This was possessedly done, lest their thoughts should be diverted from war to agriculture, lest the strong should encroach upon the possessions of the weak, and lest luxury and avarice should be encouraged by the erection of permanent houses, in too curious an attention to convenience and the elegant superfluities of life. But when the general migration was pretty well over, and a peaceable possession of their new acquired settlements had introduced new customs and manners, when the fertility of the soil had encouraged the study of husbandry, and an affection for the spots they had cultivated began naturally to arise in the tillers, a more permanent degree of property was introduced, and feuds began now to be granted for the life of the feudatory. But still feuds were not yet hereditary, though frequently granted, by the favor of the lord, to the children of the former possessor, till in process of time it became unusual, and as therefore thought hard to reject the heir if he was capable to perform the services, and therefore infants, women, and professed monks, who were incapable of bearing arms, were also incapable of succeeding to a genuine feud. But the heir, when admitted to the feud which his ancestor possessed, used generally to pay a fine or acknowledgment to the lord, in horses, arms, money, and the like, for such renewal of the feud. Why does that sound familiar? Which was called a relief, because it re-established the inheritance, or in the words of the feudal writers, in incertam et cadu cam hereditatem relevabat. I'm not entirely sure what that means. I'm gonna search that one. It relieved an uncertain and decaying inheritance. Good to know. This relief was afterwards, when feuds became absolutely hereditary. The original foundation of it had ceased. For in process of time, feuds came by degrees to be universally extended, beyond the life of the first vassal, to his sons, or perhaps to such one of them as the lord should name, and in this case the form of donation was strictly observed. For if a feud was given to a man and his sons, all his sons succeeded him in equal portions, and as they died off, their shares reverted to the lord, and did not descend to their children, or even to their surviving brothers, as not being specified in the donation. But when such a feud was given to a man and his heirs, in general terms, then a more extended rule of succession took place, and when a feudatory died, his male descendants in infinitum were admitted to the succession. when any such descendant, who thus had succeeded, died, his male descendants were also admitted in the first place, and in defect of them, such of his male collateral kindred as were of the blood or lineage of the first feudatory, but no others. For this was an unalterable maxim in feudal succession, that none was capable of inheriting a feud, but such as was of the blood of, that is, lineally descended from the first feudatory. And the descent, being thus confined to males, succeeding to equal portions of the father's feud, but this being found upon many accounts inconvenient, particularly by dividing the services, and thereby weakening the strength of the feudal union, and honorary feuds or titles of nobility being now introduced, which were not of a divisible nature, but could only be inherited by the eldest son in limitation of these military feuds, or those who are now describing, began also in most countries to descend according to the same rule of primogeniture to the eldest son, in exclusion of all the rest. Other qualities of feuds were, that the feudatory could not alien or dispose of his feud, neither could he exchange, nor yet mortgage, nor even devise it by will, without the consent of the lord. For the reason of conferring the feud, being the personal abilities of the feudatory to serve in war, it was not fit that he should be at liberty to transfer his gift, either from himself or his posterity, who were presumed to inherit his valor, to others who might prove less able. And as the feudal obligation was looked upon as reciprocal, the feudatory being entitled to the lord's protection in return for his own fealty and service, therefore the lord could no more transfer his fainery or protection without consent of his vassal, than the vassal could his feud without consent of his lord. It being equally unreasonable, the vassal should owe subjection to a superior not of his own choosing. These were the principal and very simple qualities of the genuine or original feuds, being then all of military nature, and in the hands of military persons. Though the feudatories, being under frequent incapacities of cultivating and manuring their own lands, soon found it necessary to commit part of their inferior tenants, obliging them to such returns in service, corn, cattle, or money, as might enable the chief feudatories to attend their military duties without distraction, which returns or reditus were the original of rents. And by this means, the feudal polity was greatly extended. These inferior feudatories, who held what are called in the Scots law rere fiefs, being under similar obligations, rear fiefs, who being under similar obligations of fealty, to do suit of court, to answer the stipulated renders or rent service, and to promote the welfare of their immediate superiors or lords, but this at the same time demolished the ancient simplicity of feuds, and an inroad being once made upon their constitution, it subjected them in a course of time to great varieties and innovations. Feuds came to be bought and sold, and deviations were made from the old fundamental rules of tenure and succession, which were no longer sacred when the feuds themselves no longer continued to be purely military. Hence, these tenures began now to be divided into feuda propria et impropria, proper and improper feuds, under the former of which divisions were comprehended such as were in themselves alienable without mutual license. The difference was not expressed in the creation. Such new created feuds did in all other respects follow the nature of an original, genuine, and proper feud. Proper feud. But as soon as the feudal system came to be considered in the light of a civil establishment rather than as a military plan, the ingenuity of the same ages, which perplexed all theology with the subtlety of scholastic disquisitions, although I will make one very keen statement. The civil jurisdiction arose from that of admiralty. So to say that it's not militant in nature, I believe is an error or errata. Because the title of admiral was the French head of the navy, and that also being that of sailors owing rent service to their feudal lord. But continuing. And bewildered philosophy in the mazes of metaphysical jargon began also to exert its influence on this copious and fruitful subject, in pursuance of which the most refined and oppressive consequences were drawn from what originally was a plan of simplicity and liberty, equally beneficial to both lord and tenant, and prudently calculated for their mutual protection and defense. From this one foundation, in different countries of Europe, very different superstructures have been raised. What effect it has produced on the landed property of England will appear in the following chapters. So yeah, that's where the feudal system came about. I hope everyone can see the similarities to other systems in usage and custom, even in the modern era. So, any questions on that? Any comments? Anything they'd like to add to that? I know that was a lot, but hopefully that gave everyone some insight as to what's going on with that. Any questions? Any other questions? That's what I thought, Roots. That's what I thought. I knew it had to play in feudal law because of what an oath of allegiance is. Allegiance is talking about lieges and fealty and fiefments, but it was Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England regarding feudal tenure, or the feudal system. If you look up Blackstone's Commentaries and then feudal system, it should pop up. Probably go on another 15-20 minutes just to answer any other questions anyone had. That's cool. That's good, David. I mean, generally, you kind of have to be able to ask questions, because I get it. Not everybody likes to be questioned, so. Black. Yeah. Oh, okay. I got you. Thank you, Roots. Thank you for telling me. I know, there's a lag. There is a lag. Absolutely. Yeah, now you know why Expatriation Act is so effective and has great efficacy in this realm of things. Yeah, like I said, this thing it does get easier, but you do have to understand where these things came from, just like he said, like William Blackstone said, because if you don't understand the ancient, you won't understand the modern, because everything modern stemmed and arose from everything ancient. Which is why I'm covering Blackstone so much. Which is something else Christian Walters also recommended. Just so you know. Anyone curious about like interrelations or implications of certain things? Like, or looking for more study material? I got plenty. You're right, Roots. There's nothing new under the sun. It's all the same old stuff. Yep. Concepts of war arising to controlling internal war management records of non-hearsay commerce begins. I'm not gonna lie to you, that was not a complete sentence, and I'm not sure exactly what you mean, Mike. I'm not trying to single you out, but I have no idea what you mean by that. Yeah, if you could clarify that, I'd be grateful for that, because I don't know quite what you meant. If I could construe that in a sense, so you're talking concepts of war arising to control by internal war using management of records. Although the non-hearsay commerce doesn't, I don't know what you mean. I'm not sure. I mean, but you have to understand what effectively happened. It's more modern than anything. You have a quiet Cold War. The Cold War never ended. I mean, the Cold War ended for such a brief period of time that it was like it really never ended, because it really just kept on going. If you watch the cutscene movies from Call of Duty Black Ops 6, you'll understand what happened in the early 90s. In the early 90s and the 80s that they were talking about, which is fairly important to understand. So, everything has been an internal war. That's why, there's a lot of, overarching peace treaties between sovereign nations, and those different, though technically bankrupt, but those different nations, as they had open, peace treaties, they had quiet and silent wars via intelligence agencies, which is what we've had for, I don't know, ever since the 60s, 70s. Technically, anything after Vietnam was pretty much continuation, or either the start or the continuation of the Cold War. I'm not exactly sure when the history books say the Cold War started, but it was brewing during those times. But yeah, it does have roots in feudation and feudal tenure. That's pretty keen observation there, John. I would say that seems pretty sound to me. Divisions between those with the franchise and the disenfranchised. Franchisees and disenfranchisees. Yep. Yeah. The surety is always the scapegoat when everything goes wrong. They're the one who has to make sure everything goes according to a particular plan of action. That's what they are. They are collateral. Collateral to enforce and bring to fruition some type of plan. And if, in the event that everything goes wrong, the surety is to blame and to make guarantee that everything goes to restore what should have been, or the performance thereof. Well, yeah, I see what you're saying. But the thing is, though, there had to be some form of written evidence. It may not have always been understood in this modern era, but most people had written titles. I don't know. Well, generally speaking, there's a lot of people have to have some type of written language. Maybe hieroglyphic in nature, but I don't know. Although, that could be true too. That's generally probably why a lot of Polynesian peoples were killed off, because they had an oral system of, recognizing the ownership of property. So, I could see that. Yeah, I could definitely see that. I've heard quite a number of stories about Hawaiians in that regard. Which was ultimately annexed by the United States. Yeah, I see what you mean, though. Alright, well, I'll probably go another 5-10 minutes. So, what you mean by that, Atlantis? East Timor? Interesting there. Did the Buck Act expand federal territory, or was it done before? When was the Buck Act? Like early 1900s or something like that? It probably had a part in it, but realistically speaking, most of the stuff that enlarged or encroached upon territories of North America happened within, I don't know, give or take 20 years of like 1850. So East Timor. Okay. I'll have to look into that, Atlantis. 1940. Yeah, most of the stuff that that had already happened prior to 1940. You have the Alien Registration Act that happened, I think, subsequently, and then you had like the Social Security Act. Then 1935, you had bankruptcy in 33. You had trading with TWIA, Trading with the Enemy Act, 1917, Federal Reserve, 1913. You had all that. So, there was a bunch of different acts that contributed to it more so than just the Buck Act. But I suppose it did play a part. Alright, y'all. So, absolutely, John. Glad I could help. So, if you'd like to support content like this and see more of it, you can donate. I will have my a PayPal, Cashapp, and Venmo in the description when I get around to it tonight. It's also in, I think, just about all my prior videos as well. If you'd like to set up a one-on-one, please feel free to do so. My website, just fill out the contact form, which is also in the description of some of my other videos. I'll put it in this one as well. If you'd like assistance setting up a private express trust, setting it up to be foreign and irrevocable as a successor to the Massachusetts Land Trust, that type of trust, which holds real, personal, and intangible properties, let me know. Fill out my contact form as well. If you'd like to join the Private Equity Weekly Workshop, where we have live Zoom calls Mondays and Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern, where we have a live Q&A. I present some material, and Monday's a little bit more freeform. Friday I present material. I'll ask for a donation of $200, just for cover operating costs, and then that is a lifetime membership. So thank y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all for watching and interacting. I hope this has been insightful. Hope you gained something from it. There's a lot of parallels if you're familiar with certain things. So yeah, we'll have for those already in the group, we'll have a class tomorrow at 7 Eastern, and yeah. So thank y'all for watching. Nothing in here is construed to be or intended to be financial advice, legal advice, or tax advice. So just so you know. And yeah, absolutely. Oh, okay. Yeah. I see what you're saying, Mike. But yeah, so with that, all praises to the Most High. This is B with 2B Fruitful Training Group, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank y'all.